Good morning, everyone. I am glad to see you all here today. And we're going to do part two of Jonah. And we're learning that there's a little bit of Jonah in all of us. So, as we can begin today, thank you so much, Susan, for the morning prayer. Let's jump in. I'm just going to start with a story about myself. My husband, Paul, died when I was young and married. And he died in a car crash. It was a sudden event. And it really put me in a place of incredible distress. I was physically distressed. I was grieving. My children, I had two small children at the time. They were wondering why Daddy didn't come home from work, literally. And it just really was a very, very difficult time in my life. I had, with his death, he was the breadwinner at the time. I had now a financial need that needed to be resolved. I had emotional needs, just the grief and the loss of losing a husband. And even though it was a very tumultuous relationship, because my husband was an alcoholic, it still was very much you still love him even though he's an addict. You still care for him, and that was very, very hard for me. But the greatest, most incredible distress for me was the not knowing if he had met Messiah before he died. And my whole life I was taught, people are going to burn in hell if they're not saved. And that whole impact really distressed me the most. And it took me about 1.5 years to grieve that loss. But halfway through that time, I finally got to a place where I was so distressed. And let me just read to you real quick Jonah 2:2. In Jonah 2:2 it says, as we know, Jonah is now in the belly of the great fish, Gadol, dog. He's in the belly of this great fish. And he says, in my distress, I called to Adonai, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave, I called for help, and Adonai listened to my cry. And I want to tell you that that's right where I was this night. I had put my children to bed. I was sitting there, and I was sitting in my bedroom. I had my prayer journal out, and I just cried. And I just, for the first time, grieved at great depth. Great depth. I wept at a level that I've never wept before in my life. Just a wailing. And it went on for hours. This was not just I cry for a few minutes and everything's okay. No, I wept for hours. So at the end, when I had poured out all of this grief, the Ruach HaKodesh came to me and spoke to me and said, do not worry. Your husband, Paul, is in the palm of my hand. And that agony, the pain just broke off. I realized that spiritual distress was so severe. The emotional stress was very painful. The financial stress was very difficult to get through. Seeing my children every day going, why isn't Daddy coming home? Because they were under the age of 3. They didn't really understand, your father's died. He died in a car crash. He's never coming home again. They didn't really understand that concept. And but this one was the most incredible distress. Like, could I have done something more? Could we have tried something different? I mean, I was a new believer myself. I'd only known the Lord for a year and a half before he passed away. And so even I was new at how this whole thing works, but I didn't want to think of him being forever condemned. So anyways, this distress was just completely broken off when Adonai revealed to me that my husband, from the time of his conception, his entire life was in the palm of his hand. His life was not my responsibility. His life was Adonai's responsibility. Our Heavenly Father knew him and cared for him. And that's just an incredible place of distress and depth. And I understand when I read Jonah 2:2 that that's right where I was. You know, I wasn't in the grave myself. I was not in the belly of the fish, but I was at that level of distress. And I wonder today as I look out at the people that are here, and I wonder if maybe you guys aren't feeling that same place of distress at different times in your lives or even today. I know some of you have lost a spouse and you completely understand what I'm talking about when I say the loss of a spouse is a place of incredible, incredible distress. And the financial difficulties that come with that. And I know some of you have been through have had incredible loss through divorce and having to deal with the financial distress of divorce. Not only the financial, but the emotional, the hopelessness. I know some of you have just started, struggling with your children and their teenagers, and that causes a lot of distress in the relationships that you have right now with them. And not that all teenagers are in that situation, but in this particular situation there is. And I understand that there's financial distress. When Intel here in New Mexico laid off a lot of people and Sprint closed at the same time, and now 5,000 people are out of jobs and nobody has a source of income. That's an incredible distress. And I really understand that there are times when each one of us has this distress in our lives. And Jonah, he's one of these people. He understood this. He was in this belly of a fish. And honestly, 30, 40 days before, he was walking the streets of Jerusalem. He was perfectly happy. He was a prophet. Everybody knew him. He was highly respected. And now he jumps on the ship to go to Tarsus because he cannot do what Adonai has asked him to do. And we talk about that a little bit more next week when we look at chapter 3 and we understand why this was such a hard prophecy for Jonah to do. And so we see the storm comes, the ship, and now we see him in the belly of a fish. And I can only imagine seaweed floating around, all these different things. And yet here is Jonah sitting here going, what is my life? And he cries out to Adonai, and Adonai hears him in the belly of a fish. And that's incredible. But let's see, is there anyone else that we know of that possibly could have struggled with these same situations? Let's go over to Psalms 18:6. In Psalms 18:6, we're looking at David, and he again is being pursued by Shaul, and he is in distress. And it says, in my distress I called to Adonai. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. So once again, now we have David. He's being pursued by Saul. Shaul. Saul is going, okay, David, the one that I gave my armor to so he could fight Goliath and all was good. the one who's lived in my home and is best friends with my son Jonathan. David, the same David who played his harp for Saul and when he was younger and was being tormented by a demon. This same David is the one who is being pursued to be murdered, be basically killed by Saul. And David saying, I lived in your home. You were family to me. I fought for your armies because I love Israel. I love you as a king. I would die for you. And now you're coming to kill me? What did I do? What went wrong? What went wrong with this picture? And you can just see this incredible distress that this was family to him, or at least people he lived in the same home with. And now he's pursuing him with his entire army, who are also people who served under David. And yet here he is, going to be murdered, killed by the same man that he comforted with his music just years before. That's an incredible place of distress. And then we have one more. And being that we're at the time of Pesach right now, and everyone else here is celebrating Easter, we have this incredible story that everybody's going through right now, this week, on Yeshua at the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's weeping before Adonai, saying, if this cup could please be taken from me, please remove this cup. He knows that the persecution against him is going to be great. He knows that he's going to die on the execution stake in just literally a day. He knows that he is going to die. He knows that everybody who served him is going to suffer incredibly. The disciples are going to be in pain. The women who were with them are going to be in pain. The followers of Jerusalem and all of Israel are going to be in pain. Everyone is going to suffer watching him die. He knows this incredible distress, and he weeps and asks, please take this cup. Now you have to remember, this is Yeshua. This is the son of Adonai. The son of Adonai. He is the son of Adonai, and he too is feeling this incredible distress. All I can say is that Adonai is acquainted personally with the physical, emotional, spiritual distress that we've all suffered in this room today. And I would like to see if he has a solution for this. Is there something we can do? Because we see that David says, he heard my cry. We saw Jonah, he heard my cry. We know Yeshua, he heard his cry. So what happens? Let's look at Psalms 55:22. In Psalms 55:22, here's one of the ways that we can deal with this distress. And this is a great song, actually, which we'll play at the end today. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. You know that song, it's still stuck in my head. Cast all your cares upon me. Yeshua is telling us, cast our cares upon him. Cast our cares upon him. when these distresses come, cast your cares upon him. This is what I did. I was sitting in that room. I was weeping, getting all this pain out. And I came to the conclusion that the pain was, why wasn't my husband saved? Why couldn't he have become a Christian and joined me in church before he died? And Adonai said, I take that care because I've always cared for him. I've always known his name. That is casting your care on Adonai and him responding back to you saying, I hear you. I hear you. Jonah did not stay in the belly of a fish. I can't imagine how fun it was being vomited onto the beach, but nonetheless, he lived. He continued to be a prophet of Israel. David did not stay in pursuit of the king. He became king in the end. Yeshua, we know, died and rose again. He became the sin offering he needed to become. He became now the victor over sin and death for the rest of eternity. They didn't stay in this place of distress. Neither did I. Neither did any of you who are here. And even those of you who are still in the storm of distress. You still have times when Adonai just comes and comforts you and blesses you and carries you through this time. Let's look at the next scripture I have here. Matthew 11:28. This is the second instruction that he gives us about this. Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. You know, we don't always think of weary and burden as a form of distress, but it is a form of distress. It's usually the beginning stages of distress, where you're saying, you know, what about this and what about that? I know one of my daughters is starting her own business right now, and she's doing an incredible amount of work. She's a nutritionist, and she does, you know, really feels called by Adonai to do this work. And she feels the financial distress, this weary, she's working lots of hours. She has 5 children at home as well. And here she is trying to do Adonai's work and his calling in her life and opening a clinic to be a nutritionist to help people in their healing. And unbelievable how she fits into this category. Come unto me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. She really needs that rest. She really needs Adonai to just help her carry this burden. And every time she gets in distress, she goes, well, I'll tell you what she does in a minute because we're going to get to that. Okay. So this is what's interesting when you're weary and you're burdened. If you start bringing these things to Adonai in the beginning, right, then it helps a lot. Now, there are life crises, like we talked about, major life crises that put you in the belly of a fish, and there's nothing you can do about that at that point. But then there's this other lower level, or I should say beginning stages, that also bring us into distress. And that's what we're talking about here. Bring those also to Adonai. Bring those to Yeshua and lay them at his feet and receive the rest that he gives for your soul. And you know, soul's an interesting word because it means your physical body, your mind, and your spirit. It can mean all of that weaved in together. This is not necessarily just your soul. This is a combination word where it brings everything together for you. The other thing I want to talk to you about is, how do we partner with Adonai in this work of helping people not be in distress? That whole verse, love your neighbor as yourself, right? This is what we're looking at here. So how do we fit into that? Let's look at verses Romans 14:15. And I like Romans 14:15 because, we always have instructions that are very, very specific on certain topics. And in the area of distress, believe it or not, there's a very specific warning for us as believers. If your brother is distressed because of what you eat, you are no longer acting in love. Do not, by your eating, destroy your brother for whom Messiah died. Now this is interesting. Remember we talked about love your neighbor as yourself? This is exactly what Adonai is saying here. This was a situation where some people were eating kosher and some people were not. And they were all coming into the body of Messiah. The ones who were eating kosher were saying, this is what we feel Adonai has called us to do. The other ones were saying, yes, but you live by grace, so you don't have to. Okay. This is where, when you walk into somebody's home and you do not eat kosher, but they eat kosher, you eat kosher alongside them. If I go out to dinner with someone who's a recovering alcoholic, and let's say that I drink a glass of wine with my meal, which I usually don't, but on occasion I will. I am not going to have a glass of wine while I'm having dinner with my friend who's a recovering alcoholic. Not because I think they should be strong enough to overcome it or whatever crazy ideas I have in my head at the time, but because I love them. Because I love them and I would never want to put something that causes them distress in front of them. So just a quick, warning. Take this for what it is. Do not add distress to other people. Now let's see what Adonai tells us what we should be doing about people who are in a place of distress. James 1, verse 27. James 1 verse 27 reads, religion that Adonai our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Okay. Supporting widows and orphans. I know a lot of times today we think, well, we don't know a lot of widows and orphans, but I can tell you right now in this room myself, I'm a widow. There's another one of our dear sisters in the Lord here who's a widow. And I've worked with a lot of foster children, and a lot of the foster children feel like orphans because they are not allowed to live with their parents, and they are moved from home to home to home sometimes, and they have this same situation. And a church locally just recently showed a perfect example of this. They had an all-day car clinic, and they invited anybody who had difficulties getting their cars repaired, and they did oil changes. And one of the wonderful sisters of the Lord that's here, who's been struggling to keep her car running, who is a single person. She's actually also a widow. And she went there and they fixed her motor mount. They replaced the oil. They fixed her brakes. They did, in my opinion, and I don't know these things exactly, but it seemed like hundreds of dollars of work. And they did it all for free, just to be a support to the community. And that's what this is talking about. If you have an opportunity to help somebody in a place of distress, don't add to their distress. Bring that blessing to them and help them in any way that you can. Now, as we're getting ready to wrap up today, I just want to kind of talk about what's another thing we can do as a community, as believers in Messiah. What can we do when someone's in distress? Well, when I'm in distress, one of the things that I have learned to do is I can sometimes talk to a friend. And I want to pick a friend that's trustworthy. You can't just go talk to someone who's a gossip, because gossips will take your information, spread it around, and increase your distress. So this has got to be someone that you know, love, and can trust. And they can be in your family, they can be in your friends, they can be here in your church body and be a part of your body of believers, family. And another thing is you go to prayer. Go to prayer. Take yourself and go to prayer. And sometimes when you go to a friend, the blessing of going to a friend is that they can join you in prayer. So you're crying out to Adonai, they're crying out to Adonai on your behalf, and he hears both of your prayers, and it just strengthens that support around you. Another thing you can do when you're in distress is do worship. I actually drive in my car and crank up the worship music. And that's one of the ways that I love to deal with distress. And another way is if I'm at home, I crank up the worship music and I dance. I dance until I get it all out of my body. Every muscle has expressed this distress and these emotions and released them to Adonai. And then I can hear so clearly what he has to say to me in my time of need. Another option that we have is reading the Word. I mean, look, we just read some perfect examples, and Jonah and David and Yeshua are not the only ones. You know, Saul, who was later named Paul, they had incredible things they went through. John, Peter, all the disciples, Stephen, of course, was stoned. All these people had their own level of distress in life, and everyone does. And my comment to you is, as believers, just know you're surrounded by people who've had distress in their lives. So don't be afraid or ashamed to share your distress. Find trustworthy people, share with them, people who love Adonai, who walk in his love and compassion. Share with them their distress, your distress, and let them be one of these people who is following the other commandment by loving your neighbor as yourself. Let them allow them to come alongside you and bless you by lifting you up in prayer during your time of distress, or letting them lift you up in prayer and physical, emotional, financial, any other type of support that Adonai has called them to give to you. Because we do not walk alone in the body of Messiah. We walk together, and that's what makes us the body of Messiah. All right, everyone, thank you for coming, and would you please close us in prayer?